Mr. DM, how do I roll for a perception check? If you don't know, this is the Idiot's Guide to using your D&D character sheet 5e. So you all know how this section works. You choose your character name, their class, their race, and their alignment. I, the DM, choose the level that you start at, and I'm choosing level, I think I started level 2, because level 1 is just super boring and you can't do anything. The only other interesting thing that you can choose here is your background. So the background is basically where you come from, how that informs the skills that your character might have. So for choosing a background, I really recommend that you get a copy of the Player's Handbook. So the Player's Handbook is a book that will basically guide you through being a player of D&D. It tells you every alignment you have, every ability score you have, and it gives you a list of all the possible backgrounds your character can have. For example, you can be an acolyte. So this is a religious background. Often clerics choose this, and it gives you proficiencies in skills like insight and religion, and it gives you a holy symbol to start the game with. So arguably the most important part of your character sheet are your list of skills. So these are your strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma skills. You roll for these when you make your character sheet, and you get generally scores in the range of 8 to sort of 16. And I think the sort of normal level for a common man or human is 10. So the little +2s and -1s and the circles below the main scores are how much you differ from the average. And these are what you add to your d20 rolls. So for example, if this person wants to roll strength, they roll a d20 and they add 2 because they have a +2 in strength. So I'm not going to tell you how these numbers are made, I'll just tell you how to use them. So at the top you see inspiration. If you do something cool during a game, a DM can point to you and say, I give you 1 point of inspiration, and you can use this point to re-roll any dice roll you want during the rest of the game. And you can keep it over in subsequent games. Proficiency bonus is just something that derives from the level you're at. So since you're all level 2, all of you have a proficiency bonus of +2, and you add this to skills that you're proficient with. So this has already been done for you when we made the character sheets. Saving throws and skills. So these work exactly the same as the strength roll we just talked about. So if you want to do something, so for example, if you are talking to someone and you don't know if they're telling you the truth, you can make an insight check. So that's in the skills box. You roll the d20 and then you add your modifier under insight. So if you roll an 18 on the dice and you have a +2 insight, that's an unnatural 20 that you've rolled. Saving throws are the same, but they are if someone is trying to do something to you, rather than when you're trying to do something on your own. So for example, if someone is trying to charm you and you want to resist this, you can do a wisdom saving throw. So for this you roll a d20 and then you add your wisdom saving throw modifier. And the idea is that you want your saving throw to beat whatever they roll. And if you do, then you are not charmed, and if you don't, then they do charm you. Alright, so this is smack bang in the middle of your character sheet, and it's generally used for battles, these things. So armor class comes from how much armor you're wearing and if you have a shield. So when you're in battle and you're trying to hurt someone, you do 2 rolls. So the first roll is a d20, and that's a roll to hit. So that's just to see if you manage to hit the person. And for this, you have to beat their armor class. So if someone has an armor class of 16 and you roll a 14, then you don't beat them. If you roll a 17, then you do beat them, and that means you hit them, and then the next thing that you have to do is roll for damage. So the very first thing that you do in battle when someone is trying to hit you is they roll to beat your armor class. Initiative. Initiative is when you start a battle, the first thing everyone does is roll a d20 and then add the modifier of their initiative. So for example, I roll a 17 on the dice and my initiative is -1. That is a 16 that I rolled. And initiative is first come, first serve. So the higher the roll you get, the higher up in the order of battle you get placed. So if you have a high initiative roll, then you take your turn very early on in the battle. Speed is generally determined by your race and is basically how far you can move. So if you have a speed of 30 feet, then you can move sort of a certain number of spaces in the battlefield. Hit point maximum. So hit point maximum is how much life you have. If you have a hit point maximum of 20, you have 20 points of life. If someone does damage to you of 10, you have to make a note of that and cross that out, because that means you've only got 10 life left. Hit dice. Hit dice is something that you can re-roll on a short rest or a long rest to get some HP back, to get some points back. You probably really won't use these, so you can basically ignore this. Death saves. If you go down, if your hit point is reduced to 0, that means instead of dying, you fall unconscious. And unless someone stabilizes you by healing you, every single time it's your go in initiative, you have to roll a d20. If you roll a 10 or above, you succeed. If you roll below a 10, you fail. 3 failures means that you die. Your character is dead and is never coming back. Okay, so I'm well aware that we had some confusion with this section last time. So this is just below the last section that I showed you on your character sheet, and this is generally for if you're attacking someone with a weapon. So in name, that is the name of the weapon you're using. So it could say broadsword, it could say short bow. Attack bonus is what you roll, is what you add to the d20 roll. So if I'm trying to hit someone with a sword and I roll to hit, I roll a d20 and then I add 4 onto it. That's my attack bonus. The next section, the damage/type, is then when I roll for damage. So I first roll to hit using my attack bonus, and if I do successfully hit, then I go on to the next section with the damage and I roll damage. So here I would roll 2 d4s, so 2 dice with 4 sides, plus 2, and the type of damage is piercing. And the type of damage is important because certain creatures are resistant to certain types of damage. So for example, if I roll an 18 damage, and a creature is resistant to that type of damage, it halves the damage. And generally that's really all you need to know. There are some other things like traits, flaws, bonds, but these are all things that you can fill in for the character yourself. This is basically part of your character's personality. The only other thing that I would pay attention to is there's a section right below all of your skills which says passive perception. So this is just 10 plus your perception modifier. So if I have a perception of +2, then my passive perception is 12. So I use that sometimes when you're sort of rolling about in D&D and there's something in the background. If you have a high passive perception, I can tell you that you may notice this. But you can generally ignore everything else on the character sheet. If you're a spellcaster, you have another part of the character sheet listing your spells. These are very simple, and I'll just quickly go over some of the rules now. So I should have filled in most of these parts of the character sheet when I was doing them. So spellcasting class is basically what type of spellcaster you are. Are you a wizard? Are you a cleric? You don't really need to know this. Spellcasting ability is the same thing. So for example, I think clerics use the spellcasting ability of wisdom, so they add their wisdom scores to their rolls, but you don't need to know this. So the 2 important ones are spell save DC, so this is in the middle of the top of the sheet. So spell save DC is what foes must roll to avoid your spell effects. So if you're trying to cast something on someone and they're trying to avoid it, they have to beat your spell save DC. Spell attack bonus, which is on the right, is basically the same as roll to hit. So if you're trying to, for example, hit someone with a spell from far away, you roll a d20 to see if you hit, then you add your spell attack bonus. So one distinction that I might not have made clear is between cantrips and spells. So you'll see that the first section of spells is called cantrips, and the rest of them are just 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. So cantrips don't have spell slots, so this means you can use cantrips over and over and over and over again, and you don't run out of them. Everything else, spells at level 1, level 2, etc., all have spell slots. So if you only have 5 spell slots at level 1, that means you can only cast 5 spells before you've had another long rest. So if you fire a spell and it doesn't hit the person, that's still expended a spell slot, so you'd only have 4 more left. And that's basically everything that you need to know. The only other thing that I would really stress is this box, which is on the first sheet of your character sheet, the front page, in the bottom right hand corner, and it says features and traits. So this box contains all of the special stuff that you get for choosing your specific background, race, and class. So for example, as a fighter, I think Brett gets some feature that allows him to attack twice instead of only attacking once, and this is super useful. Last session, Mum used some kind of halfling feature which allowed her to move through a small space. So each of you have specific features and traits which you can use, and I don't know your character sheets off the top of my head. So you have to remind me when you want to use something. So if you want to use something cool, if you have a special spell that you get because you're a dwarf or a barbarian, you can tell me and you can use it. So it's always good to read up and know which features and traits that you have. For example, I think a lot of you, I think the tiefling, I think dwarves, etc. have dark vision. So this means that if you ever get put into a dark cave or a dungeon and I say you can't see anything, you can say, actually I have dark vision so I can see in front of me. So sometimes these things can really save the game. Alright, that's the Idiot's Guide to D&D 5e character sheets. I hope I haven't made it more confusing. And just ask if you're confused.